Howdy, you're watching 0 to 60 with Sergei Dratchev, and last time we stopped at 1977. I was 15 years old and I just finished 8th grade school, number 25, that's what it was called, and they had no grade 9 or grade 10, and my parents were not cruel enough to shove me out and make me work at the factory. They all agreed that I'm going to grade 9 and grade 10 to complete the optional 10th grade education. And so I had to change schools, and while the first one, school number 25, was just like 5-minute walk away from our apartment building, the new school, school number 34, again, that was, our schools had no names, just numbers, right? So school 34 was about 10 minutes away by electric bus or trolley bus. During the Soviet era, for some reason, the electric transport was super popular. I remember that all our passenger trains were pulled by electric locomotive. And I think diesel, they only used for, those сортировочные локомотивы, basically those engines that were building trains at the station, those were a regular diesel. Well, I guess people would say that they're all diesel electric, but those you could see smoke coming out of the chimneys and stuff, but all passenger trains were electric, so there were lines above the electric lines above the rails. And so trolley bus was an electric bus with those long sticks that were connected to the lines. And so basically the electric lines were all over the city, and of course these guys could only navigate under them, and quite often you would see like probably an inexperienced driver would just take the corner too wide, and those sticks, the contacts, that would fall off, and the bus is helpless. There's no energy, right? So they had to call somebody, push it forward, raise those things in there. So yeah, it was all about electricity. And so yeah, I started going to the school number 34, and the first surprise was, I was not doing very good, but I was not doing too bad either at school. And when you graduate from school, from grade 8, they give you a, certificate of graduation with, grades and marks and stuff like that. And when my parents took me to see the principal of school 34, this guy says, let's enroll him into a specialized class. And in that school, classes were called by numbers again. So it was 10-1. No, wait, 9-1, 9-2, 9-3, 9-4, 9-5. Basically, if it's grade 9, it was, 1, 2, 3, 4, right? And so I didn't want to do this, even though I was pretty good at math, and that's what that specialized class was all about. It was 9-1, basically, grade 9, class 1. And while other kids were getting free driver license training, like we have this in Russian, it's called автодела. So all the kids in, let's say, 9-2, 9-3, 9-4, 9-5, they were studying automobiles and how to drive, and then by the end of the school they were given their driver's licenses. So that's what I wanted, because my biggest dream was to be a truck driver, maybe after the fighter pilot. But if I were to go with this option of enrolling into this specialized class with emphasis on math and physics, basically this 9-1, it was for, we had lots of rich kids in there, and they were kind of like preparing you for college, right? And so I said, no, I don't want to do this. And the principal was very persuasive. I still remember, right? It's like 77, what is it, 23 plus 24, 47 years ago. I still remember. And he persuaded my parents to enroll me into this stupid specialized class. And so I had no автодела, no driver's license. and that's how it started. It was again more hours devoted to math and physics. And so, okay, the next one is bus ride. I already talked about that. So yeah, it was sometimes I would take a regular bus, and most often I would take the electric bus. And I remember regular bus, I would stand behind the driver, behind the partition, because his cab was all glass, glass, so you cannot enter his cubicle. And I would just stand there and watch him, steer. And I think they were all automatic. I don't remember he was shifting. It was even back then. It was buses were all, had all automatic transmission. And I remember standing there, holding to the rails, and watching the guy steer. And I thought, man, how cool would it be to drive a bus, So I'm telling you, I was always interested in transportation ever since I was a kid. So, but this time I think, my dad, his mother persuaded him to sell that Lada he had, 2106, because, she was afraid he would kill himself. But then she died, and so my dad, he couldn't, stay with carless, or driverless, and so he got, but he couldn't get the Lada, so somehow he made a deal with his brother in Moscow, who worked at a factory, and they had kind of like a shorter line, but now he was only able to get a Moskvich, like another popular Russian brand. And so my driving lessons continued. Remember I said we would go to some back roads, and my dad, he enjoyed, kind of like teaching me. And so I was driving this Moskvich, and again dreaming, oh man, like when I'm going to be old enough to actually get the license. So again, I was like 15, 16 years old. And the big difference with this new school number 34, was that because, like I said, most kids were from rich families. I could see that. I was very surprised when we started having some home parties. Basically, if the school 25, the first 8 grades, we were still kids. Like here, I remember like first day they were in this 991. Class, I already see like everybody there's couples, there's like a guy and a girl sitting at a desk, a guy and a girl, and they would go out together for breaks, like holy moly, like we were 15, 16, but they already looked like married couples, and girls were beautiful, and so it was a big difference. So kind of like I'm into the adult world now, and we started having parties. Like once in a while, probably I think like once a month, somebody would say, okay, Saturday, 6 p.m., there's a party at, let's say, Natasha's place, And that would be parents supervising there, and all kids that want to go, they would, attend there. It's basically, these guys would have like a big apartment, and there would be some music, and, would be even some champagne. I remember, I think I was like 16 probably. I think it was either grade 10. I think it was grade 10. Grade 10 when I had my first champagne, and it was at one of these parties. So it was like unbelievable. It was such a huge contrast, from basically kids only school 25, where we're just plain kids, and here we're all grown up. We're having parties, and I didn't have a girlfriend or anything, but I remember I got infatuated with one girl. Her name was Natasha, I still remember. And all I did was for 3 days, it was like a fever. For 3 days, she was in the back, during all classes. And I remember I had this constant desire to look at her. So I would sit like this, and I would turn and look at her, like every couple of minutes. But I didn't do anything, and then I didn't ask her out, and then after 3 days that fever was gone. That's it. So the infatuation was over. That's what I remember. Now, music that was played at all these parties, and that's one thing that also kind of like was surprising, because we had lots of music fans, and we would go to these parties, right? So these guys would have Western music, like Scorpions and all these fancy rock bands from the West. And back then, of course, we had the we were already past the, you know, the records. So most people use the bobine, like a big spool of magnetic tape, you know, some studio players. And then of course later we switched to those cassettes, remember those? But what's funny is that everybody had that music, and so it was all kind of like shared, you know, like let's say, I don't know, if you know somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody, they would buy a record somewhere during the trip, occasional trip to the West, and they would bring it home and they would make copies on magnetic tape and they would just spread it among friends, maybe sell it. Yeah, I think the people charge some money for this. So of course it was all illegal, like from this Western standpoint of view, right? So you buying and selling copyrighted music, but there was no other way to, there was no access to Western music, you know. But that's what all these guys, all these cool guys, you know, in my school, they were all had these records, you know, like Queen, and I remember like later when I entered university, some guy had the entire opera, you know, the Jesus Christ Superstar opera, and there was even on the back of the album cover there was text, and I was so excited because I started learning English then, right? And you can actually listen to music and you can follow the text. So I pretty much knew all the verses by heart, you know, when they were singing this opera. And the guy made me a copy, so I had it at home on my own magnetic recorder / player. So that's about music, right? So tapes, reels, and everything was shared or sold, resold, and Western music was super popular. Now, of course, typical Russian music, yeah, you can go to a store, you can buy a record, or you can buy a, you know, a reel with that music, but most people were interested in Western music, even though, of course, they didn't understand a word of what we're saying, but it was kind of like cool, you know, to have something, somebody would sing something in English or German, so it was a big deal. Now, I think during the, yeah, when we were on break between grade 9 and 10, something clicked in my brain and I decided to learn English. And I knew that I couldn't learn it by myself, so I decided to enter the teaching program at the local university. It was a pedagogical, you know, like teachers training institute. Basically, it was 5 years, and then you get a diploma as a teacher of English. And I knew that that was my best chance to learn English. I didn't care what I would do after. I was just focusing on the language. And I remember during that summer break between grades 9 and 10, I found somewhere Samoучитель, basically teach yourself book. And it was designed for people who wanted to take the entrance exam, because I don't know how it works here, but in Russia, you took entrance exams at the university. Like I remember, we had English, Russian literature, and I think history. So not at the school, not at the high school, but actually at the university. You know, when you apply, and then they tell you, okay, your first exam, let's say Russian literature, is June 25th, and then the next one would be history, Russian history, actually like world history. And so I think there were four entrance exams. Like we didn't have this SAT stuff, this kid stuff they have nowadays, right? Like high school and the university had nothing to do, that had nothing in common, right? So there was no exams at the school that would help you to enter the university. Like I think, yeah, we did have some kind of like exit exams at the high school, but the results had nothing to do with the university. To enter the university, you had to take, their own exams. And so I started studying this book, which was, again, designed to prepare you for the entrance exams to a university, or it was called Institute, like Teachers Training Institute, but it was like a pedagogical university. Like with, I got kind of like a BA or MA in of arts in education. And so that's how I spent my summer. And then, you know, before I was pretty indifferent to English, but then grade 10, I started really paying attention, and you know, I started trying to speak. But that book became my kind of like my daily reader, that manual. So I kind of became obsessed. I don't know why, and yeah, so that was that. And then, okay, USSR, what was it like? Well, I talked about this before. Like, we had, you know, cheap clothes, no Western imports, like no sneakers, no jeans, unless you knew somebody who traveled to the West. But one thing I wanted to say that kind of like surprised me in comparison when I came to Canada is that when you go to the restaurant, like even let's say you went to you're waiting for a train, and the railroad, there's a big station, and of course Vokzal, actually like a German word, Vokzal, kind of like Wachsaal. Oh yeah, like waiting room, to translate from German. Vokzal, that's the Russian word for a big train station. And there's always a restaurant, and we would go, let's say our train is, I don't know, 3 hours away, or it's getting delayed. When you had a meal, it was usually like a 3-course meal. First you had a salad, right? Then you had the main dish, sometimes with a soup or borscht, you know. And then you had the dessert. And what's interesting is that you didn't have to tell them. They would bring you the salad first, and then you eat it, and then let's say, you know, 10-15 minutes later they'll bring you the main dish, and they wait for you to finish it, then they bring you the dessert, right? And so one thing that kind of like perplexed me here in Canada and the States, let's say you go to Denny's, right? So you order, I don't know, some fruit salad, pancakes, some, you know. So these idiots always bring you everything together, you know. Like you cannot eat 2-3 dishes at once, and so by the time you finish the first one, that one will be cold. And so we never had this approach in Russia, you know, or in the Soviet Union. Like people understood that first you start with salad, you know, then they bring you the soup, and then they bring you the, you know, I don't know, macaroni and cheese or whatever, like rice and beef. So it was all done like the way it should be, you know. Whereas here, they don't care. They bring you like 10 plates. Okay, half of it will be cold, and you have to throw it away. Oh, by the way, funny thing happened today. I went to McDonald's, and I see they have a new, like a double burger, but some kind of like a Western barbecue flavor. And I said, I want that double, like 2 patties, right? And they said, yeah. And so they gave me the bag, and stupid, I didn't check it inside. I walked like 200 meters to my car. I opened the bag, I opened the box with the burger, and there's only 1 patty. And she charged me for 2, so I paid like $13 for a burger and a drink. And I didn't want to, you know, it was so tasty. I ate it. So now what do? You go back and you say, hey, there was only one patty. But I didn't want to go back there and argue with them. Like, man, like McDonald's sometimes are such idiots. Okay, trips to Moscow. Yeah, usually in the summer. I think I talked about this before. My dad wanted to go where he was born, near Moscow, to that tiny village where only 3 houses were left. And I think his mother was still alive, my grandma. And this took like whole year of planning. I remember we didn't have there was no GPS, you know, no cell phones, right? So he would buy a big atlas, you know, like a big map, and we would create a route he would buy a notepad and write down, okay, like here we turn left, here we turn right, you know, there was like a whole plan. And then when we finally went on this trip, which it was like 1,100 kilometers, which is 650 miles, but it would take us like 2 days, and we'd bring a tent, we would sleep somewhere in the woods, you know. It was quite a road trip. And of course back then there was no like truck stops or anything like that. So basically, yeah, we would bring our food, and then it was all public land. We would find a place somewhere where we could install a tent, and we would all sleep. Maybe 2 people would sleep in the car, 2 people would sleep in the tent. It was all safe. There was no, you know, serial killers But yeah, it was a big part of my childhood. I was always looking forward to these trips because I got to drive. I still didn't have a license, so my dad would give me the wheel, and he would sit on the passenger side, and he was watching for policemen. He would say, "Okay, Sergey, okay, here's the deal. If we see cops, right, so you pull over right away and we switch seats, okay?" So you were driving and looking for cops. And I remember I would drive, my neck would get so sore because I was so focused on driving, but my neck was sore, everything was sore, and the dad says, "You want to, change seats?" And no, I'm good. I just love driving so much, even this Moskvich, I think it was a 4-cylinder engine, so 4 gears, of course, all manual, 70 horsepower. 70 horsepower. Now my Jeep has 200 in automatic transmission and leather seats and air conditioning. Of course, and back then there was no air conditioning. So yeah, those trips, I still remember those. And so yeah, I decided to apply to the university in order to learn English. And I remember my parents were kind of like, "Come on, Sergey, you know that it's all rich people with connections. You will never get in because it's English language studies. They want to send all their kids, like the rich parents, they want to send their kids because it was kind of like a prestigious program, right? They wanted their kids to be teacher of English, Sergey, come on, stop it. Basically we are nobody, so you will never get in." And of course I proved them wrong. And what is this? First encounter with death. Oh yeah, I remember. So this was the first time somebody I knew died. So we had one kid, don't remember his name, but this was either grade 9 or 10, so I'm like 15, 16 years old. And all of a sudden I show up for school and they say the school is canceled because we all going to the funeral. Okay, who died? Turns out this kid got sick and he had a fever, and for some reason he decided to take a bath, a hot bath, and so he lost consciousness from what I remember, and he basically drowned in the bath because he had high fever, and high fever and hot water don't go well together. And so yeah, that was the first time I ever encountered death as an event. Now, 2 more notes I made here is Комсомол, which is Коммунистический союз молодежи, Communist Union of Youth. So basically it was all obligatory. You could not say no. Everybody had to be a member of this. It's kind of like, after this you were supposed to be a communist. So first you were a pioneer, which was also kind of like a communist organization for small kids. Then grade 5 or 6, you entered this Komsomol, kind of like a young communist, and we were required to attend like all these May 1st, parades and stuff like that. So basically it was all obligatory, because if you say no, I don't want to be a member of this Komsomol, they would talk to your parents would talk to you. I think that's kind of like what they have now in China or something, right? So it was very boring, and then I think once a month we would have a meeting of all the Komsomol members in our class with some super boring topics. And then another fun activity was, I think also maybe once a month, they would do this scrap metal search, believe it or not. Like all the kids would go out and look for scrap metal. Like, I'm serious. Yeah, it was either scrap metal, or we would look for so металлолом in Russian, or we would look for макулатура. Макулатура is discarded paper. So let's say you go somewhere, you find a bunch of boxes, paper crates, something that can be recycled, and we would bring it all to school. And but yeah, metal was a big event. Let's say you go somewhere, you find some, I don't know, piece of a dozer or something, and then you grab your buddies and you try to bring it to school. It was always, communist activity. Komsomol, Communist Union of Communist League, Young Communists League, probably that's what it should be translated as. So yeah, those were the days, and of course, I think grade 9 and 10, I kind of like put my bike away. I didn't bike as much, whereas during the first grades, I kind of like lived on that bike, Ukraine, single gear bike. I'm not quite sure what I did with my time. I think, as usual, I watched a bunch of movies. I've always been a big movie fan. So whenever there was a new movie at our local theater, and they only had one theater, and so they kept the same movie for like 3 days, right? And so you were lucky if you could watch 2 movies in a week, right? There was no like now, right? You go and there's like 15, 20 theaters, and you can watch 5, 6, 7 movies, right? No, we had one theater inside the theater, and often for some reason they would play Indian movies, Indian with translation, and our women were just crying their eyes out. They really loved these Indian dramas. They were super popular during the late years of the Soviet Union. Like everybody loved this Indian kind of like soap operas, the singing, the dancing, and it was all dubbed. I think it was all dubbed in English or translated in English, Russian. So those were the days. That's what I remember from 77 to 79. And so 79, that's when I graduated the high school number 34. And I started, despite my parents' protests, I started getting ready to take the entrance exams to the local university and become a student and learn the English language. So next in the next segment, we'll talk about my 5 years I spent at the university. It was quite something. Lots of memories from that period. But now we're gonna stop at 1979. I'm 17 years old and life was looking good.